On January 4th, Commodore introduced C128, which could also work in a mod that was fully compatible with C64. Steve Jobs quit Apple on September 16, and while they thought that they'd do just fine, he did come back years later to save the company from the brink of an end. You can dislike the man if you will, but he was a visionary. On December 8th, New York Times published an article on how no average user will ever want to own a laptop, which is just hilarious today. Microsoft and IBM began working on a joint OS going by the name of OS/2. We know how it ended up today, but back then it was supposed to be something big. Also in 1985, Atari introduced its new 8-bit microcomputers, namely 65, 130 and 260 lines, and a 16-bit 520 ST. Nintendo released NES and Super Mario Bros, and Intel introduced 386 CPU. Amiga premiered its A1000 model, which while incredibly impressive, was too expensive and not very successful until the release of A500 2 years later. While all this news seemed to be touching many areas and subjects, it's clear that 1985 was a breakthrough year for computing. But let's see how it was for C64 gaming. ACE Air Combat Emulator is a combat flight simulation where you're a lone fighter pilot operating from one of 3 remaining Allied bases against enemy invasion. Each base holds one of the futuristic Mark 2.1 AW-80 crafts, and you're the only one who can contain these beasts and use them against overwhelming enemy forces. You'll be flying numerous missions and fighting against all land, naval and air targets. The game can be played in 9 levels of difficulty during summer or winter seasons and day or at night. And such a vast choice before the game even starts was definitely not a standard back then. ACE also uses synthesis to announce dangers approaching in the form of enemy planes or missiles. If during the mission you're on the verge of running out of fuel, you have to either come back to your base or perform an aerial refueling, which will require meeting with a refueling craft at specified coordinates, which in itself is an interesting experience, at least in simulation as old as ACE. I'm not very proficient at simulation games, but I know a good one when I see it, and ACE is really decent. Alice in Wonderland is an adventure game based upon the 2 Alice books by Lewis Carroll, very similar to year prior's Below the Root. In fact, it uses the same engine as Below the Root, with a difference being that the earlier game put more emphasis on role-playing, while Alice is more about puzzle solving. And these can come in many varieties. Some are your classical adventure genre inventory puzzles, others require solving riddles, and there are also these that demand figuring out how to get somewhere that's seemingly impossible to get to. The game, however, is not an adaptation of the books, but more of a story inspired by them. All in all, time is incredibly important in Alice, and you have to complete the game before the Red King awakes, so keeping an eye on it is crucial. Interestingly enough, in conversations, Alice does not pick words but rather emotions, which is an unexpected but fresh touch. If you like adventure games, especially those earlier ones, Alice in Wonderland is not one to miss. Auto-Duel is a post-apocalyptic top-down view game taking place in futuristic version of USA, where gangs and vigilantes run the wasteland in their armored and heavily armed cars. It's a mixture of light role-playing with driving and action-based combat, and it's based on a classic board game, Car Wars. You're an average Joe and you must earn enough money to own a car and then support yourself performing courier missions around the country. You're not locked on a certain pre-assigned path and can freely traverse the world however you please. So you'll be able to visit different cities, explore the highways, take part in car arena battles, which can be quite profitable in fact, salvage car parts from wrecks, take on gangs in the wilderness, and more. You'll be able to build and customize vehicles, choosing different bodies and chassis of the cars, and equipping them with guns, rockets, mine layers, oil slick, smoke screen generators, and others. And while there is an overarching story that unfolds after completing certain number of courier missions, you don't have to follow it, and can just live your futuristic wasteland life of a budget Mad Max. Bard's Tale along the Ultima series of games is one of the forefathers of modern RPGs. The town of Skarabrae has been attacked by the evil wizard Magnar, and he turned most of the inhabitants into his army of monsters, and you'll have to find Magnar and dispose of him video game style, so permanently in an epic battle culminating hours-long gameplay. Your party can consist of up to 6 adventurers, 3 of which stand in the front line and can engage in melee combat, while the back 3 use spells, items and bard chants. There can be an additional 7th character in your party temporarily, and that's either a conjured creature or a character you've met on your travels. The game world is viewed through a small window with simple 3D graphics during traversal, and the rest of the screen is used for character stats and for status display and interaction. Other than the title screen and bard chants, there's no sound or music in the game. Which is a waste, but I suppose they had to fit in quite a lot of content, so if something had to go, it was the sound. Right from the get-go, it's obvious why Bard's Tale was so popular. It was easy to get into and deep when you finally started playing. It's a real treat to all fans of the genre. World Championship Boxing, aka Star Rank Boxing, unlike most games depicting the sport, is not an arcade romp, but a simulation. At the beginning of the game you create your boxer with an aim of defeating the world champion, Barry McGuigan. So you have to steadily climb the ladder of the world ranking list. You can choose between 2 players directly above you and 1 below in the ranking. Between fights you get to train your boxer, and while in many games it only influences the stats, in World Championship Boxing you can actually feel the improvements while playing. You get money for wins, but in reality it's irrelevant as your ultimate goal is to become the next champion, not to amass wealth. While graphics and sounds are nothing to write home about, they do justice to represent what's happening on the screen, and you can actually sort of feel the feedback of each hit. So you could say that their design is appropriate. Anyway, the game features 2 covers and 6 kinds of hits. The movement on the ring is indirect, meaning as you attack your fighter will move forward, and as you cover he will back out. If you like the sport and have a soft spot for C64, it's a good one, check it out. Beachhead 2 is a successor to the first game and follows the similar formula of chaining smaller minigames into one bigger overarching story. This time the dictator from the first game, going by the name of the Dragon, seeks revenge against the Allied forces by kidnapping hostages and bringing them to his island fortress. Well, when he kidnaps them they're not hostages yet, just your everyday VIPs that are worth saving. Apparently, as it's not shown anywhere. And they become hostages when they're in said captivity. Oh, and the game can be played in 2-player multiplayer where one person controls the allies and the other the dictator. Anyway, the first minigame, or sequence if you will, is called the attack, and you have to march your soldiers forwards hiding behind the walls, and dictator has to shoot at those soldiers. Second is rescue, where allies use machine gun to defend the hostages as they cross the open courtyard, and dictator deploys tanks, trucks, trapdoors and soldiers on top of a wall to stop them. Only one of them can be on screen at once, so it's worth keeping in mind. Third is called escape. Allied commander places hostages on copters and then controls those copters, avoiding attacks. Dictator chooses automated defenses and then aims his tanks at helicopters. The final sequence, aptly named Battle, is a showdown between the Allied commander and the dictator, where they throw knives at each other until only one is left standing. If you like the first Beachhead, second's 2-player mode is a fun addition and you should enjoy it as well. While Boulder Dash 2 Rockford's Revenge is a follow-up to one of the most important games of the whole 8-bit era, it will probably be the shortest preview in this video. Why, you may wonder? Well, cause there's not much to talk about here really. It's the same puzzle game we've spoke about in the previous video, mechanically unchanged from the original. So you still have to collect diamonds, and after securing a certain amount you need to get to the exit. And all the while making sure that you don't die and don't block your way out. The main difference here is use of new engine that fixed some issues of the original and added slime and growing blocks as the new elements to the gameplay. Other than that, it's a 16 level strong second Boulder Dash that's as fun and demanding as the first one was. If you like the original, you'll most likely like this one too. Bounty Bob Strikes Back is a puzzle action platformer where you have to claim all of the 25 levels in their entirety. You do so by walking on platforms that light up when stepped on. When you highlight every single one in each level, you move to the next. Some are easier to get, others not so much, so you'll be jumping a lot using ladders, slides, suction tubes, cannons and transporters to name a few, while avoiding dangerous enemy creatures. They kill you on touch, so they have to be jumped over or killed via use of special food items scattered around each level. After consuming such food, you can remove the enemies for a short time by just walking into them. First levels are pretty straightforward and easy to complete. The further you go to, however, you'll need to plan your strategy, as some may have just a solution or two for completion. Oh, and all that within preset time limit. Bounty Bob is a sequel to Miner 49er that sadly did not make the cut to one of the earlier videos in the series. Oh well, such is life. Let me start by highlighting that even though I love strategy games, I hate Risk. With passion. I don't know why, but I just despise it and its gameplay, and consider it below what is playable and what could be considered a strategy. Now, I know that I'm wrong, so don't worry, I'm aware that I am mistaken, as most of you can't be wrong in loving it. It's just me and my issue with it. Anyway, Colonial Conquest I actually kinda low-key am able to enjoy if there are other players involved. And it's basically Risk on steroids. It takes place between 19th and 20th century and allows you and up to 5 buddies to pick one of 6 major powers of the time, so England, Germany, France, United States, Japan and Russia. You control both land and naval forces of your chosen country, and your goal is to take as much land as possible and become the biggest superpower that there is. And since there's over 120 minor nations, the game can take a while to complete. Each nation's units have their own attack and defense values as well as different cost. For instance, Russia pays a third of what England does for the ground units, but British units are much stronger. So playing with each nation is a bit different and may require adjusting your strategies. A lot can be said about Commando, and I will, but what I'd like to start here with is Rob Hubbard's iconic tune that you're hearing in the background now. Usually I would begin with gameplay footage, but this single tune alone is worth those few seconds to fully appreciate what the men and the C64 were capable of. It's a classic. Now, with that out of the way, what is Commando? You should know if you're watching this video, but since you may just be curious and not a C64 passionate, I'll try to explain the best I can. It's a port from arcades and it's vertically scrolling shoot 'em up where you're controlling a lone soldier who's pitted against an overwhelming force of enemy units and he alone has to defeat them all. To do that, you have 3 things at your disposal: your trusty M60 machine gun, 6 grenades, and most of all, your complete ignorance of your odds of survival, which are a number so low, I'm not sure there's a name for it. And enemies? They don't F around either. And they go at you at full force. Dynamite, mines, grenades, the explosions are coming from all sides and have to be avoided. So at times it seems like you're dancing between those and enemy bullets. That said, and also quite fortunately for you, it seems that enemy units were trained by the same people who trained stormtroopers. So while they shoot at you and toss grenades left and right, their accuracy is questionable at best. And most deaths will be results from you walking straight into a bullet. So it's a difficult game, but mainly because of all the chaos everywhere rather than proficiency of enemy forces. Commando is an iconic title mainly for its music, but it's pretty fun in its own right, even if nowhere near the best shooter on the system. One thing I believe could be improved is the length of the game. Arcade Original had 8 levels and C64 Sport has only 3. So yeah, that's pretty mid, given most of conversions from the arcades on C64 were usually quite feature-rich. Doriath is an action-adventure game in which you Illidan the Lore Master who found an ancient scroll written ages ago by Fianna, beloved of the Lord of Time. It speaks about mythical coronet of Arian, which grants immortality, and its location in the depths of Doriath. To complete the game you must gain 100% wisdom and find 8 pieces of scroll of Warsley to reveal the exact location and way of recovering the coronet. Now, that was a lot of names that are nothing but a nightmare to pronounce, at least to me. To increase your wisdom you must open chests that are spread around the dungeons. They may contain pieces of the scroll that you need or one of various other helpful items like potions and spells that can be used to kill monsters. If you don't have a scroll and corresponding amulet to destroy a particular monster, it needs to be avoided as his touch will decrease your stamina, and if it goes below 2%, it's game over. Some obstacles can reduce stamina too, and there are objects that require use of colored keys to pass. Doriath is an interesting exploration game that uses odd jump/float mechanic that requires a minute to get used to. It's a fun title nonetheless, and I recommend it to any and all fans of epic adventures. The Duel is a 2-player arcade versus shooter, and yes, 2-player only, not up to 2 players. In essence, it's every Western fan's wet dream. You and a buddy are 2 cowboys, and you're pitted against each other in a deadly shootout duel. Each of you has 5 bullets in your Colts, and only your keen eye, fast hands and dexterity to save you. So whomever is faster, more accurate will walk. And it's the end of the road for the other. Simple as that. And while the Duel is basic in its design, it's hella fun, and will no doubt prove to be a highlight of your gaming sessions if you have a friend or friends to play C64 games with. One thing I never understood was why the cowboys were purple. Perhaps it's amount of alcohol traveling in their veins, perhaps constipation or fear, but I never got an answer. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I've never played nearly enough Elite to ever fall in love with it. But it doesn't mean I don't recognize its significance in gaming history. And I've played Frontier to death, first on Amiga and then on PC, and Elite Dangerous, but that's a completely different subject for a completely different video. Perhaps comparison of all 3 and the first encounters. Perhaps. Coming back to the subject at hand, so Elite, what Ian Bell and David Braben did with this title is short of legendary, keeping in mind it originally released on an underpowered BBC Micro and then ported to everything else under the sun. Elite consisted of 8 galaxies with 256 planets each. Given the power of these early systems, they had to be procedurally generated, and Wikipedia calls Elite a space trading video game. For me, however, all titles in the series were more of a life in a space simulators, where you could trade various commodities, take military missions, fight enemy rogue ships, mine asteroids, get into bounty hunting, and in general live your space future life. Each of the planets available in the game has an orbiting around its space station. In later games, game world expanded beyond the scope of anyone's expectations, but that's something we'll not tackle in any of the C64's videos. For now, all I can say that Elite was a first game in a long-running series, and it was a very good one, limited only by the hardware it originally was designed for. Finders Keepers is a platform game with some maze sections. You play as Magic Knight and are sent by the king to find a special present for his daughter, the princess, in the castle of Spriteland. The castle is made up of two kinds of areas, flick scrolling rooms and two large scrolling mazes. An interesting aspect of the game is ability to pick up various objects all around the castle. They then can be sold for gold to various spread around the fortress traders. But there's a caveat to it though. They can be sold as they are, or even better, combined into a single more valuable item. For instance, a bar of lead and Philosopher's Stone have a certain value. But combined they create a bar of gold which is much more valuable. Finders Keepers is not a run-of-the-mill C64 game, it's quite unusual, so approach it only if you believe it may be something that you'd enjoy. The fourth protocol is based on a same title book by Frederick Forsyth, and it's an interactive fiction video game. It is composed out of 3 scenes in which you have to complete the game. First is the so-called NATO documents scene, in which you're in your office and you have to figure out who's leaking the secret documents, to whom and why. You can also assign watches to targets to learn more about them. Second section is the bomb. Not in its playability though, it's just the name of it. It's similar to the first with a difference of you being in the field on the trail of a nuclear device that has been smuggled into the country. You can also look around and examine objects here. And finally, the last one is SAS Assault, where you've discovered the bomb and using information gathered in previous 2 sections you have to try to defuse it. This part will require some text input on your side however. The fourth protocol is not your everyday C64 game, there's no action, no scrolling or shooting, it feels as if you were reading a book at parts. And you know what? It's fun because it's so different and unusual. Frankie Goes to Hollywood is not a game I will be able to explain well in such a short window I've got for each title, but I'll try. It's a side-scrolling action-adventure with some mysterious elements and even a murder to solve, all rolled into one crazy package. You start in Mundanesville, the most boring place in the world, and you have to complete over 60 tasks to become a full real person again, and unlock the passage to the so-called Pleasure Dome, which sounds way better than Mundanesville. You can collect and carry up to 8 items at once, and they have to be used in various situations to complete the aforementioned 60 tasks. The game also features corridors of power and networks of subterranean tunnels that lead to various places around Mundanesville and various mini-games. The Pleasure Dome also consists of many puzzles and mini-games, and I figured it's important to mention it here, as you'll need to complete them all to gather the required personality points to become the real person. Whatever that really means. Am I one? Or am I just a sophisticated AI created to fool YouTube viewers? We'll never know. Or at least not until I finally get a camera. Anyway, the minigames are very varied and represent different genres. All are quite weird though, and feel more like an acid dream than a game created based on traditional game design document. Even if for no other reason, it's worth to check out Frankie Goes to Hollywood to get to experience probably the most weird game you'll ever play. G.I. Joe, same as in cartoons and comic books, never ends. Never. If you do well, if you do bad, the game will carry on and you can play. Did you notice that many games in this video seem to be quite unusual for one reason or another? Perhaps 1985 was a special year indeed. Anyway, G.I. Joe is an arcade title that is surprisingly content-rich and pleasant in its graphical design. You can play in 1 or 2 player mode, where in 2 player, second person controls Cobra units. The game features a lot of characters, each with their own unique weapons. On the G.I. Joe side, they are Duke, Scarlet, Recondo, Torpedo, Snake Eyes, Roadblock, Spirit, Zap, Gung-Ho, Snowjob, Blowtorch and Stalker. And I gotta say, looking at those years later, they do seem to be named the same way porn actors in the 70s would. On the Cobra side, there are Destro, Baroness, Zartan, Firefly, Cobra Commander, Storm Shadow, Major Blood and Scrap Iron. The game shows you a map on which points of interest are shown with flashing ovals and diamonds. Ovals represent missions in vehicles and diamonds missions on foot. There are 4 vehicles available for the missions, and G.I. Joe needs to defeat 8 HISS tanks to win vehicle missions, while Cobra wins if G.I. Joe loses 3 of theirs. This is also when G.I. Joe can free captured units if there are any. Missions on foot usually see both sides put against each other in single-screen shootouts in various settings. G.I. Joe is definitely a title worth checking out, even if in the end it might not be everyone's cup of tea. In Ghettoblaster, you're rocking Rodney and you're employed by the Interdisc Record Company. You must collect batteries for your Ghettoblaster and then locate cassette tapes demos of dance music. While you play those cassettes, people around you dance to the beat coming off your boombox. You know, how they randomly did in the 80s. Only not really. Anyway, you must deliver those tapes to Interdisc, getting there through the large open city that's a maze of streets, alleyways and cul-de-sacs. All the way avoiding theft-down walkers, gangsters of groove, psycho killers and cops. Or bobbies, I should say, really, as the game takes place in London. Interesting fact, Ghettoblaster was inspired by real-life Rasta and his Ghettoblaster at Battersea Park in London. Oh, and all the streets are named after the famous music tracks. So yeah, that's Ghettoblaster, aka Street Beat. The Goonies is based on Steven Spielberg's movie of the same title, in which motley crew of suburban kids from a small town in Oregon must save their homes from foreclosure. And all that by finding a treasure map leading to an old pirate ship in a cavern that's filled with treasures. Although I am maneuvering around and avoiding the Italian criminal family of Fratellis. The game is built out of 8 entirely different single-screen levels based on the scenes from the movie, and loosely following its plot. In levels 1 through 7 you must make sure that both Goonies get to the exit, which may require a bit of gymnastics and solving very simple puzzles, while avoiding the Fratellis and other environmental dangers. In the last level, both Goonies need to get to the treasure. While it may sound basic and boring, the game is actually fantastic and really fun. Especially that it can be enjoyed in 2-player mode when each of the players controls another Goonie, rather than one person having to switch between the two. The Great American Cross-Country Road Race, most likely the longest titled game on C64, is an expanded for the capabilities of modern at the time systems port of an earlier racer, Enduro. You're a race driver, duh, racing across United States while passing through some of its major cities. The game features day and night cycle, different weather conditions, limited fuel and road obstacles. You do have to keep an eye on highway patrols too, cause they can be a pain as well. You get to pick your own route while racing, and every available route has its own scoreboard for the top 10 fastest times. TGA-CCRR, wow, that sounds bad abbreviated. Anyway, TGA-CCRR is a fun checkpoint racer where you race against the time rather than other opponents, which is fine, and I enjoy these types of driving games a lot actually, as they are good to compete against yourself when there's no one around to compete with. Hardball is the first infamous series of baseball simulation games, also arguably the best baseball title on C64, and one that originated on the system before being ported to other machines. Let the fact that within 4 years that it sold over 500,000 units on C64 alone speak for its quality. Which by today's standards may not be a lot, but in the 80s, even late 80s, it was a huge hit. Bad pun intended. The game can be enjoyed by 1 or 2 players. During pitching, one of 4 cardinal directions is used along with fire button to choose a pitch and then again to aim. The same directions are used to aim the swing when batting, and guess what? The very same are used for fielding to choose to which base the ball should be thrown rather than directly aiming the ball somewhere. Which all makes the controls incredibly easy to understand and master, and gameplay hella fun. And I realize that I'm probably the last person walking the earth using hella, but I like it and I will until I die. Hardball was one of the first games to incorporate the view from the pitcher's perspective, same as in MLB Broadcast, and it was a trend that was soon followed by all games in the genre. Heart of Africa is an unofficial follow-up to 7 Cities of Gold. It uses the same engine and is very similar in its graphical presentation. It's 1890 and famous explorer Mr. Prim disappeared in mysterious circumstances in Africa, leaving his riches to the one who finds the legendary Heart of Africa before 1895. And to do that you'll have to gain sympathies of the tribes of the 5 regions of the continent. They will direct you to smaller treasures and will give you hints towards finding the location of the tomb of the pharaoh, where supposedly the big one is. In every region there are different most valuable items in different spots, so you'll need to travel the continent several times before you'll figure out the location of the tomb. Cities and villages hold various buildings, and you'll need to visit those often not only to purchase necessary gear and to sell riches, but also to save the game. It's an unusual game and quite a bit different than 7 Cities of Gold was, despite using the same engine. Sure, there are some similar elements here and there, but it stands on its own legs and presents its own unique story and gameplay. If you like adventure games with some strategic elements, this one's definitely worth your time. Let me start by saying that Hero of the Golden Talisman is a game I loved as a kid, and then completely forgot about it, and for over 30 years it never crossed my mind. But now, as I was working on this video, I found it, and I'm super hyped, because I will have to give it a go when I get a day or two of work in a couple of months. Hero of Golden Talisman is an early example of Metroidvania style of gameplay, even though it preceded both titles genre took name from. Story-wise, an evil wizard cursed your hometown, and the only way to lift the curse is to find and assemble 5 pieces of the Golden Talisman, which the wizard has hidden in his lair. Said lair is a side-scrolling maze spanning impressive 512 screens, which I don't have to add, is massive for the time. So you run, jump, swim underwater and climb as expected, but you also shoot the enemies despite the game cover clearly showing our hero punching them. Unless his fists are so darn powerful that they break the sound barrier, sending the shockwaves as shots. Who knows? Game design of the 80s was something else after all. And I don't mean it in a bad way. Along the way you'll come across various useful items, 5 of which you can carry for later use, and they can be keys, ropes, lamps for dark areas, or flags that improve your weapon, among others. Your weapon, so your fist. Whatever. The minimap in the lower left indicates which rooms have not been visited and alerts to the presence of items within given room. Upon release, the game did not gain too great reviews from Gaming Max, but personally I had more fun with it than with many more bigger budget titles that released on the system. This one, same as the title suggests, is golden, so do yourself a favor and try it out. Hypersports is another of those joystick-breaking multi-event sports games and a successor to Track and Field. This time, however, sadly the devs opted for 2 players maximum, which in my opinion is serious overlooking of game's multiplayer potential. Each of the 6 disciplines requires you to qualify first before you can compete, and they are 100-meter freestyle swimming, skeet shooting, gymnastics, archery, triple jump and weightlifting. Hypersports is a conversion from the arcades, omitting pole vault present in the original. While I always enjoyed multi-event games in multiplayer among friends, having the mode limited to just 2 folks cost Hypersports points in my books. And also, if I'm to be honest, I preferred every single sports game from a year prior's video to this. But that's me, and it shouldn't influence your opinion about it. Especially that the game's not that bad in the end. This is where I was supposed to talk about how smooth Karateka's animations were, how simple and plain but clear and decent the graphics were, and how cinematically it felt with you alone against hundreds of martial art fighters on a quest to save the Princess Mariko. I would mention that the intro animation, while simple, was climatic and gave off that Bruce Lee movie vibe. But I'm not gonna say any of that, at least not the way I was planning to, because it seems I totally forgot how ungodly slow the game was on C64. And there is no reason for that really, as there are more demanding, better looking games on the system, and those are usually very smooth. And yet, this drags. It looks as if it was ported from another system without any care or attention put to it. And for that, I don't care about it too much, and it's here only for sentimental and historical purposes. I wanted to like it, I really did, but it just fails so hard I can't. Perhaps you do, but after seeing ports to other systems, I'm just disappointed. Karateka was a game I wanted to like, but couldn't. Kung Fu Master on the other hand is a game I didn't think I would, but I actually did like. Odd how life is sometimes, right? Kung Fu Master is also a port from the arcades, but this time it's given due justice and it's faithful to the source material, for better or worse. While it's single playing only and makes you rush to be successful, Kung Fu Master ends up being surprisingly fun. It features 5 levels with an end boss at the end of each, and after completing the last the game starts from the first stage just at the higher difficulty. It's fast and frantic by design, throwing heaps of enemies at you for quick disposal, and while most are removed with just 1 kick, knife throwers require 2. Bosses are all different and demand unique approach, which is a fun way to culminate the level that they spawned on. Kung Fu Master was never supposed to be a standard walking beat-em-up or a versus fighting game, it's its own thing, and what it aims to do does well, proving that sometimes doing your own thing is better than following well-known ideas. Now, saying all that, I don't mean that Kung Fu Master is simple, cause it's not. And often if you don't keep your pace, the enemies may overwhelm you, and if they grab you, your energy will keep draining hella fast and you're basically done. It's not a game for everyone, personally I see myself coming to it for a game or two every decade or so, but I realize some may want to complete it more often. Little Computer People was a title unlike any other, at least back in the day. For all intents and purposes it can be considered the Sims of 1980s. The game has one screen showing side view of the inside of an empty 3-story house, and after a while a person will move in. Said person will go about their day, cooking, watching TV or doing various other things, and occasionally will initiate interaction with a player, talking about their needs or feelings. While it's pretty limited, a player can also interact with the person by typing in basic commands or playing games with them. It may have not been as advanced or sandboxy as The Sims were, feeling more like an advanced aquarium or a Tamagotchi, but for the time when no one heard of anything similar before, it was a breath of fresh air and a subject of many conversations. In Mad Doctor you play as, well, Mad Doctor, who in the footsteps of fictional Dr. Frankenstein aims to animate human being built out of corpse parts. Now, if that was not a great subject for the game for the kids in the 80s, I don't know what is. Today it would get plastered with so many different ratings hardly anyone would be able to play it. Anyway, the game map is composed out of 6 interconnected by paths and underground passages locations, and you have to transport enough corpses to your lab in the castle to combine various pieces into your soon-to-be animated monstrosity. You'll obviously need to assemble the body on something, so steel bolt would be necessary too. The parts have to come from different bodies and they need to be fresh and of good quality. Wow, the more I talk about it, the more gruesome it sounds. I mean, you could in theory use low-quality parts and not harvest them from different, well, let's say donors, but the resulting creature would be aggressive. And you can either steal fresh bodies or, well, create fresh bodies out of the villagers. You know, psycho killer style. In time, this will cause hostility towards you and the villagers may even attack you on sight. So it's best to go about your business at night. To complete the resurrection, you also need carbolic acid for disinfection and sedative to keep the reanimated creature under control. When you have everything, you need to move it to the mystical stone circle, where lightning will give it life. If you have a metal kite that I forgot to mention earlier on, that is. Still, I now realize why we have game ratings today. It's an odd game, and just for the sake of being so weird and so dark, it's worthy of being here. Oh, and Mad Doctor is an exclusive for C64, I thought that may be worth mentioning. Mail Order Monsters is another unusual title that I cannot for the life of me assign a genre to. It's basically build your own monster and then send it out to fight other monsters. You can choose between 12 different types, Tyro, Hominid, Arachnid, Worm, Wasp, Bronto and Squid among others, and then you get to select between 11 different body enhancements like Tentacles, Sting and Fiery Breath to name a few. Finally, you can equip your creature with an additional weapon, for instance rifle, laser gun or flamethrower, and yeah, I know it sounds weird. Every one of those enhancements and upgrades costs money, and to get more you have to win battles, so you can sort of work on your creature between them, adding bits and pieces to create the ultimate destruction-causing behemoth. Fights are similar to those in Archon, but may have different winning conditions like killing all other monsters, capturing the flag, or killing more small hordlings than your opponent does. The game features 3 difficulty levels, which are also different game modes. Beginner lets you pick pre-created monster and start playing. Intermediate gives you some money up front to create your own and enhance it. And Tournament mode is more of a career, where you can have more than one monster and sort of manage them. Mail Order Monsters is another of those really creative ideas that sadly never got a proper modern remake. Mandragore is a fantasy role-playing game. The king, ruler of the kingdom, is killed in an accident, and evil Yarod Nor took over control and began his reign of tyranny. And you as a hero, to save the land, have to lead a group of 4 pre-made or your own characters on a quest to get rid of Yarod Nor. In character creation there are 5 races to choose from: dwarf, elf, half-orc, hobbit and humans. 6 professions of warrior, ranger, magician, sage, thief and wanderer, and they're defined by 6 characteristics: constitution, strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity and aspect. On your travels you'll visit 9 castles, each of which contains problems and clues that will be useful later in the game. You'll battle various monsters, trade in villages and develop your character's skills. Characters move on the map as a single unit and are only ever treated as singular heroes during combat, in which commands are issued in text using abbreviations, which while not very difficult will take a little while to get used to and memorize. Not gonna lie, despite my love for the RPG genre, I've never played Mandragore, and all I've said here is based on things I could learn about it online. So I can't recommend or suggest avoiding it really. It had pretty solid scores wherever it was reviewed, and that's why it's here, but you'll have to make your own mind about it. The Master of Magic is a role-playing game that probably has the best music out of all role-playing games on C64, as it was composed by the man himself, the legendary Rob Hubbard. Story-wise, while traveling the caves you are dragged through a pool of water by the hand of Telric, a mysterious Master of Magic. He will only allow you to return home if you can help him by recovering the Amulet of Immortality. Now, my question is, if he has such huge power that he can kidnap you over a distance and deliver, let's say, 60-80 kg sack of meat in one piece, can he not do the same with a small amulet that's probably no more than an ounce or so? Well, if he could, we wouldn't have a game now, would we? Anyway, he teaches you 4 useful spells: Magic Missile to attack creatures, a wide radius burn spell, Drain Energy spell and a magical shield, and sends you on your way. As you search for the amulet you'll find various other pieces of gear, mainly weapons and potions, and these can be collected and used. You also tackle different monsters, with vampires, hellhounds and orcs being just a few of them. If you're a fan of the genre, Master of Magic may definitely be worth checking out. Monty is on the run from authorities and he must leave England through English Channel and head to freedom to Europe. As you start the game, you pick 5 items out of 21 that will be a part of your freedom kit, and you have to collect them to complete the game. These have to be chosen correctly, which may require trial and error and playing the game quite a few times, as they will be required in completing some of the puzzles. As you go about it, you'll find other items that can prove useful in completing the game, that end up with Monty boarding the ferry to France. Anyway, Monty on the Run is a flick-screen platformer with some puzzle elements that originated on ZX Spectrum and was ported to other systems later. And it shows, as while the game is incredibly fun and playable, clearly no care was put to using any of C64's specialized hardware, and there's no scrolling, no multicolored graphics and only single color sprites. In short, it's a very good game, only short of being great because of complete lack of extra care given during porting. C64's conversion of Mr. Do is near arcade perfect, given the limitations of the system that is, which is not something that could be said about dozens upon dozens of other conversions. The objective of Mr. Do is to score as many points as possible by digging tunnels through the ground and collecting cherries. Cherries are spread around the level in groups of 8, and collecting all 8 from a single group without stopping awards bonus points. Mr. Do is constantly chased by so-called creeps that aim to catch him, and when they do, he loses one of his lives. The level is completed either when all cherries are collected, when all creeps are destroyed, when word extra signifying an extra life is spelled, or when a diamond is found. Mr. Do can defeat creeps by either dropping apples on them or hitting them with his bouncing ball. After each use, however, the delay after bouncing ball is refreshed and ready for next use extends, so it's best to utilize apples first. Every 5000 points an alpha monster appears carrying a letter, and when he's destroyed, the letter is added to your collection. When you gather enough to form extra, as mentioned earlier on, you'll score an additional life. Mr. Do is not an easy game, and no wonder as it came from the arcades, but despite that, it's really fun and I enjoy a play session of it once in a while. Notes of Yesod is a flick-screen platformer ported from ZX Spectrum, and while it's little enhanced, it still feels a lot like a Spectrum game. Meaning there's no scrolling or colorful sprites, which is always such when talking about C64 games, as the system was capable of both. Anyway, you're Charlie and you have to venture into the caverns below the surface of the moon to retrieve 8 colored crystals that will help you find the monolith that needs to be destroyed. It is crucial, however, to find a lunar mole before venturing into the caves, as it can chew through the walls inside it and will reveal new areas of the maze. Charlie will meet two kinds of enemies, or monsters if you will. Some will be harmful, reducing his strength, and others will not, but will bounce him around, so while not deadly per se, they're annoying as F. If you like arcade games, Notes of Yesod is not bad and maybe your cup of tea. I certainly remember enjoying it quite a bit. Paradroid is top-down view, multi-scrolling shoot-em-up with puzzle elements. Your objective is to clear a fleet of starships of enemy robots by either destroying them or taking them over via minigame. The game is set on a huge spaceship that consists of numerous rooms and levels, each populated by hostiles. Each droid, including the one you control, is represented by a circle around a 3-digit number, which coincidentally sorta, but not really, but kinda, not directly, but more or less, represents droid's power. If you didn't understand anything from that fit of craziness I was under, in short, the bigger the number, the stronger the enemy. There are overall 24 different kinds of droids in 10 classes, and taking over one requires completing a minigame involving circuit diagrams and logic gates. When you take a droid over, you have to supply more power to its circuits than it does itself before the time runs out. And this is where the logic gates come in handy, as otherwise lower level droid could never take on the higher one. When you take control of a droid, the one you were controlling before is instantly destroyed. The stronger one you control, the stronger effectively you are. I know that all of it sounds a bit odd, but it's easier done than said in this particular case. So it would be easier for you to just give Paradroid a go than listen to me trying to articulate its inner mechanics in just a few short sentences. But, and that's most important here, it's a really good game, worth your time, believe me. Project Space Station is one of the most ambitious games of the whole 8-bit era. You're cast in a role of a NASA administrator who is in charge of designing, building and maintaining a space station, all within the allotted time of just 15 years. During which you'll plan shuttle launches, you'll hire personnel, manage the budget, conduct research, develop and obviously build the titular space station. The game starts in the planning phase, which is the only one that's not timed, and where you allocate funds to various budget items like crew selection, modules and R&D. Then you have to pick a crew, all of which are described by their own unique set of skills and characteristics, and even more so, compatibility level with their co-workers. Then you purchase equipment and modules like labs or solar arrays, and schedule launches of one of 2 available shuttles. And that, my dear viewers, is just me scratching the surface of a huge shielded steel shuttle's chassis with my bare nails. I may have mentioned with other games that it's difficult to describe their particularities in detail in as short time as it's allotted per game, but while it really was tough with those, with Project Space Station it's literally impossible without being overly generalizing. So to summarize, you have 15 years to complete the project and you're responsible for everything, from designing, planning, hiring, supplies, launches to eventual construction. Project Space Station feels at times more like a tool for NASA employees to train on rather than the game, but by God is it fun. Racing Distraction Set is a split-screen isometric view racer for 1 or 2 players. There's 50 built-in tracks in the game and 5 vehicles to choose from: Beetle, Stock Car, Dirt Bike, Porsche and Lunar Lander. Each car has its own characteristic and you can also choose tires and engine size based on the track that you'll race on. You may also equip it with landmines and oil slicks to dispose of those pesky opponents. But easily the best feature of Racing Distraction Set is a built-in level editor. It allows for modifying of existing tracks and creation of completely new ones. You can create a track layout, choose a surface and set a gravity profile. All this makes the game near infinitely playable, especially if you have someone to race against. I don't these days, so yeah, no fun for me. Rags to Riches is both fun to play and kinda heavy subject-wise, as it could be called a bum simulator, at least in its initial part. Anyway, you're a homeless vagrant and you have to survive on the streets of a modern city. You start with close to nothing and have to save up enough to get a haircut, secure some odd jobs here and there, finally attend high school and then college to eventually become a millionaire. So at the very least, it's a story with a possible happy end. You get money initially by selling bottles, finding it scattered around the streets in change and an odd dollar bill here and there, and later on through employment. The city is divided into 4 districts and you can travel between them using the subway. There's an alcohol level, food/rest, and 2 education meters that describe your character. And when alcohol and food rest levels reach 0, you die, and the game ends. Food can be purchased at restaurants, convenience stores, fast food outlets, and obtained freely at soup kitchen. Drinking alcohol is an inexpensive means of staying alive, but you cannot get a job when affected. Robbers and IRS agents are after your money, and police can arrest you for not having a fresh haircut. And your hair regrows every 5 days. So keep that in mind. Each part of the city has its own purpose. South is for your initial survivor where you start the game, in West you can get a haircut and find a job, East is mainly for educational purposes, and North for making your money grow. Rags to Riches is an interesting title and one worth a look if you enjoy games that are really unique. Toasty! Don't let the simple graphics fool you. If you have someone to race against, Rally Speedway is as good as they get, and it's easily the one versus racer I had most fun with on my C64. Nothing even came close. You could say that it's a deathmatch of racing games, and you're not far off in this assessment. 2 cars are placed next to each other on a track and have to race. Duh! The game is not split screen though, and you race on the same one. Whenever one player gets ahead of another by a distance greater than the screen size, be it through better driving or having the other one crash, the loser gets a penalty, both cars are reset and the game continues. Both players can try to push each other off the track, which makes the game really exciting, and watching that little opposing driver on fire roll out from a wreck is hella fun. The game comes pre-built with 6 different tracks and you can set up quite a lot of pre-race options like type of road surfaces, maximum car speed, pace of acceleration and whether the cars can be destroyed or not. And choosing the latter is a mistake, believe me. It's only fun when cars get totaled. Cherry on top of this already sticky sweet pie is a built-in track editor extending the life of Rally Speedway infinitely. It is bar none my favorite versus racer on C64, and if you have someone else with you who enjoys these, skip all other games we spoke about in this video so far and start with this one. You'll both love it. Reach for the Stars is space themed strategy game for 1 to 4 players, often considered to be earliest commercially published example of the 4X genre. So you'll explore far-off unknown systems, expand your empire establishing new colonies, exploit the planets for resources, and build large and powerful fleets to exterminate any and all opponents. The game is played in turns and each is divided into 2 phases, development and movement. In development phase you work on planetary production, assigning productions to each of the planets under your control, and in movement phase you can send ships to other star systems to either explore, colonize or conquer. At the beginning of the game you have very limited funds and have to decide how to invest them, be it in technology, ships or environmental upgrades. And this decision alone, when playing against other people, can make or break your game, based on what they do and how they progress their space nations. Ships come in 3 kinds: scouts, which are fast and cheap and are used for exploration, they cannot fight or carry colonists however. Transports, incapable of fighting but can carry colonists. And finally warships that can't carry colonists but can raise hell all around the space. Reach for the Stars is one of the best C64 strategy games and one that is probably in the top 10 most replayable on the system, because of how different each game can turn out to be. As per usual, it's obviously best played with others and not against the CPU. Rescue on Fractalus is a first-person 3D vehicular shooter. You're in control of the Valkyrie space fighter and have to fly around various planets, landing on them and saving stranded pilots. When plenty enough are saved, you have to return to the mothership to move to the next planet. It would be pretty easy though if that was all, but all of the planets are heavily defended by the so-called Jaggies. There are numerous anti-aircraft guns and also flying saucers that attack you. So you're destroying this all as much as you're saving lost souls. Your ship is equipped with compass, altimeter and scanner to help you locate stranded pilots and save them. And you best master use of this soon, as when the nighttime missions will start, these instruments will become crucial not only for saving others but also for your survival. In the far-off future of mystical year 2010, where there are no longer any wars in the world, all disputes are settled with a game of Rocketball. On one hand, it's silly to resolve anything really with Rocketball, on another, I wouldn't mind world without conflict and war. Rocketball is a futuristic sports game viewed from a side at a slightly elevated angle and can be played by 1 or 2 players. While the viewpoint is from the side, the arena is circular with an opening at the outer side of it. All players from both teams constantly skate leftwards trying to throw the ball into that opening. And the team with most goals after 10 minutes wins the match. It is possible to tackle the player holding the ball, so it should be done when possible to gain advantage and control of the ball. While video footage may not really give it away, Rocketball is really fun and one of the very few sports games that I genuinely enjoy. Invaders of the Lost Tomb, aka Scarabäus, is a first-person 3D adventure game with a 90 degrees movement. Your aim in the game is to find the ancient treasure of Scarabäus, a jewel in the shape of a dung beetle hidden inside the tomb. On your way, you'll explore puzzles that will reveal which of the 2 vials found along the journey can be drunk, and which will prove poisonous. And since you entered the tomb poisoned already, you have to solve those puzzles to drink the antidotes. Other than that, the game is divided into 3 maze-like floors, each with different set of objectives. On the first floor, you have to collect 9 pieces of hieroglyphs from the mummies before venturing to the next one. If you're not gonna secure all, the next set of puzzles is impossible to solve, so keep that in mind. On second floor, you have to decipher puzzles hidden in the alcoves using the hieroglyphs collected in the first. There's 13 alcoves to complete and they are guarded by spiders, which should obviously be avoided. On the last floor, there's a pharaoh's tomb in the center and 12 alcoves. Each of them contains vials of medicine or poison, and on this floor you're chased by zombies that you have to avoid or trap, and it's where the last puzzle is present before completing the game. Now, if I haven't seen the game and just heard all this, I would have thought that whoever said it is insane. So yeah, do whatever you want with this. Shadowfire is an adventure role-playing game with a very aggressive time limit of only 1 hour and 40 minutes to complete. You're leading a so-called Enigma Force team of 6 unique mercenaries, and you have to rescue Ambassador Cryx from the traitor Zov's flagship before he discovers the secret plans for a new type of a spaceship. Each of your characters has a different set of abilities. Silky is an insectoid and a strong fighter. Zark Montor is a team leader and is an expert in unarmed combat and the only translator in the group. Severina Maris is the only one who can pick locks. Torik is an avian specializing in explosives and fastest moving character out of all in your team. Mol is powerful but slow combat droid, and Manto is weak droid but the only team member that can operate the transporter that is crucial to mission success. Controls are icon based and you have to utilize all skills of your team members to be able to save the ambassador and capture Zov within given time. Shadowfire is one of the most original games of the whole 8-bit era, so if you like unusual titles, this one's as interesting as they come. Silent Service was designed by now legendary Sid Meier, who fathered many series of beloved games. It's a submarine simulation set in the Pacific Ocean during World War II, with player controlling US sub and patrolling the area. It's also one of the very best submarine simulations on C64. By today's standards, or even comparing it to the sequel, it's pretty simplistic, but this fact made it infinitely more playable than it would have been otherwise back then, to the players unfamiliar with advanced military simulations. That said, difficulty could be raised quite considerably to suit players' skill level if needed. Graphics-wise, it's pretty decent on Commodore's Little Beast. It's nothing to write home about though, but for a simulation, simple strategic view with all controls in plain sight is easy to understand during those high-pressure, adrenaline-fueled battles. So, it's perfect presentation to a near-perfect game. 6-Gun Shootout is a turn-based strategy in a western setting, an unusual mixture that can be enjoyed by up to 2 players on a single system. It features 10 scenarios, half of which are based on historical situations and other half on entirely fictional ones, like 1959's Rio Bravo or The Good, the Bad and the Ugly movies for instance. The players are split into 2 groups, one representing the good guys and the other, as you can probably guess, the bad guys. All characters have their own stats and wield their own weapons out of the 18 available ones. 6-Gun Shootout, despite its very primitive presentation, took a lot of things under consideration, like line of sight, terrain features, cover and even wounds and their location. So a wound in the leg would slow character down and in the arm would impact his accuracy. You can also create your own character and modify any of the available 10 scenarios to customize your experience. 6-Gun Shootout is an unusual game that's easy to learn and very enjoyable to master. A true treat to all fans of turn-based strategies that seek something more fresh than your classical wargame scenarios. Skool Daze is a school simulator. Well, not really, but could be stretched to be considered that. You play as Eric and your main task is to steal your school report out of the staff room without getting caught. It's obviously easier said than done, so you'll have to accomplish various tasks around the school before you'll be able to do just that. There are obviously other pupils at the school, and while most are unnamed, there's 3 others that have names and can be interacted with. There is also 4 teachers. If you're caught out of class or misbehaving, teachers pursue you, and when you're caught, they issue lines. When you accumulate 10,000 lines or more, the game ends with you being expelled. You can, however, also get in trouble for things that are not your fault, like being punished for sitting down on the floor when in fact you've been pushed and knocked down. So you have to also make sure that other pupils won't get you intentionally into trouble. In other words, you'll need to complete all the necessary tasks to fulfill your main goal while living your school life, attending classes when bell rings, etc. It's a unique title and one worth your attention if you've never played it. Skyfox is a sci-fi flight simulation where you can complete 15 missions that can be played at 5 difficulty levels. Story-wise, aliens invaded Earth and you're sent off to dispose of the threat. You're flying the most advanced attack fighter plane on Earth, the titular Skyfox. It is equipped with deflection shields, laser cannons, 5 guided and 5 heat-seeking missiles, and can fly at the speed of up to Mach 4. On your mission you'll encounter enemy tanks, their planes, and also finally a mothership. You detect the enemies approaching in waves via radar and the long-range scanner, and have to defeat them before they get to your base. If you're close to running out of fuel, you'll have to come back to your base to refuel, so make sure to time it for the moments where you're least vulnerable. I believe I mentioned with the first Spy vs Spy game that I never liked those. It's hard to tell why, but that's the truth, and nothing changed for me with the second outing, The Island Caper. It doesn't mean that it's a bad game, just that it didn't sit well with me. All that aside, it's basically the same deal as in original, but with a different theme. This time, the game is set on a desert island. And you no longer start with a fixed number of traps, but must collect raw materials to build them first. Also, you do not collect 4 items as in the first game, but 3 pieces of a missile and have to escape the island in a submarine before the volcano erupts. The game features 7 difficulty levels, which correspond to the amount of time before the eruption. The Island Caper switches earlier titles' clubs for swords for combat. So yeah, if you liked the first one, you're more than likely going to love this one. And if you didn't, it's more of the same. You're Clad, the astronaut, and you're in space. Armed with your trusty laser gun, and you have to regain control of the factory located in outer space. It was a facility used for production of robots, and now it's taken over by the evil aliens who waste no time there and keep reprogramming the robots to conquer the Earth. Do you ever wonder why there's no peaceful aliens in video games? I mean, for once they could invade us to clean the air, oceans, and reduce our CO2 production by half, all the way planting parks and forests everywhere. That would be something to look forward to. Anyway, to take the factory back you have to reach the central control room. To get there, however, you have to overcome many obstacles and collect several objects. These are to be used to perform several various tasks that are crucial to complete before taking over the computer. Along the way you also find fuel and patches to help you, and make sure to collect those as Strangeloop is quite big, featuring 240 different rooms, each filled with dangers. Summer Games 2 is a multi-discipline sports simulation for up to 8 players. This time, however, most events apart from one drop the requirement for waggling the joystick, and the controls are realized in a more reasonable manner that's less expensive for the end user. Meaning you won't have to replace your joystick after just a few gaming sessions. So yeah, that's good. Anyway, there's 8 events to participate in. Triple jump, rowing, javelin throw, equestrian, high jump, fencing, cycling and kayaking. They're perhaps not most interesting of events, but as with most Epic's games, all of them are nicely animated and pretty playable. So if you have a friend or even better friends to play it with, it's an afternoon of fun. I can pretty much guarantee that. Temple of Apshai Trilogy is a graphically and musically enhanced remake of earlier Dungeon Quest series of games. So Temple of Apshai, Upper Reaches of Apshai and Curse of Ra. Now, that's quite a lot of content for a singular package. Anyway, the game could be considered one of the earliest examples of roguelikes that were inspired by the original but complemented the underlying ideas with colorful graphics. It features hundreds of rooms to explore, different weapons and armor, and various enemies to defeat. Your character is described by 6 characteristics of intelligence, ego, constitution, intuition, strength and dexterity, and he develops and gets stronger along your adventure. I've never played it, if I'm to be honest, but after looking it up, I'm interested and I'll make sure to check it out, as it looks like my cup of tea. Theater Europe is a single-player turn-based strategy game depicting hypothetical conflict between NATO and Warsaw Pact in the 80s, and you can take control of either of the sides. For Warsaw Pact, the objective is to advance with several divisions beyond the Rhine within 29 in-game days, while NATO has an opposite objective of preventing just that. It's worth keeping in mind that if you ever decide upon launching a total nuclear attack on an enemy, the computer will do the same and it will assure mutual annihilation. The game is interesting, but as far as I know, it's impossible to win. As if you're close to winning conventionally, an opposing side will launch nuclear strike. Now, if you don't respond, you'll lose. And if you do, it will result with mutual annihilation once more. I may be daft and miss something here, but correct me if I'm wrong in this assumption. I know that nuclear weapons can theoretically be disabled in the game setup, but that's sorta defeating the purpose of a full strategic simulation of conflict in the region, right? All that said, the gameplay itself is pretty fun and worth a go at least once or twice to see the gameplay develop from both sides. Hooders Wins is a Commando-style vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. You're armed with rifle and grenades and have to fight your way through dozens upon dozens of enemies over 8 increasingly more difficult levels. Other than shooting enemies, you have to also rescue your comrades who are being led away. You shoot your gun with tapping on the fire button and ammo for it is endless. Grenades, however, do end up and you have to find and pick up refills in boxes along your fight, and they're thrown by holding the fire button down. You start the game with 3 lives, get an extra one at 10,000 points and another one every 20,000. After completing all 8 levels, you get a congratulations screen that brings you back to the first one again to carry on, as supposedly your backup squad of soldiers didn't make the same run you did successfully. Sad. Anyway, Hooders Wins is fun, some might say even more fun than Commando was, as it's longer and has more user-friendly controls, but that's questionable as some just love that Commando music theme. Yours truly included. So make up your own mind, but whatever you land on, in the case of which is better, remember that even if you lean towards Commando, Hooders Wins is super fun nonetheless. Same as Summer Games 2 we spoke about a few minutes ago, Winter Games is Epix's multi-discipline sports simulation, this time focusing on Winter Olympics based events, for up to, and you guessed it right, 8 players. It features 7 events to participate in: hot dog, which is sorta trick skiing mixed with ski jumping, biathlon, figure skating, ski jump, speed skating, free skating and bobsled. Now, most of Epix's sports series of games is very good, usually having an interesting mixture of great with little less fun and occasional bad events. But overall, they're very enjoyable, especially with friends. This, Winter Games, despite only having 7 events, is probably the first in which every single event is fun to compete in, even if there's a lot of skating involved. So make sure to have it somewhere in your rotation for when the friends come over to play Classic, so that it's easy to find and fire up. Yie Ar Kung-Fu is a single-player versus fighting game that originated in the arcades and was later on converted to home systems, inspired by Bruce Lee's Hong Kong martial arts films. You play as Oolong, and have to defeat numerous martial arts masters to prove that you're the best and to win the title of the Grandmaster, which may have been the case in original, but on C64 after defeating the last, the game starts from the first again, so it's more of an endurance/survival contest, rather than the competition for the title really. You have kicks and punches at your disposal and no special moves or weapons, but can jump higher than most of your enemies and have your keen mind to help you defeat the opponents. That should be enough, right? It's not for me, as I don't remember the last time I managed to complete ER, but I haven't played in a minute, so perhaps I'd be better at it today. Who knows? Zorro is the bomb. Not in the movies though, but in this game. Well, in the movies too, but in a different age-induced cringe way. Anyway, Zorro is an action-adventure game similar in its presentation and design to Bruce Lee and the Goonies, but more focused on adventuring aspects. Beautiful Senorita is kidnapped by the evil Sergeant Garcia and you have to save her. To do so, you must find 3 items: Chalice of Honor, Horseshoe of Luck and Boot of Briskness. But to be able to grab those, you'll need to utilize other items appropriately in correct spots. For instance, you must give bottle of rum to barman, who will then drink it promptly and fall on his back drunk. From then on, you can use his belly as a trampoline. And Zorro is full of little adventuring bits like that, so it's fun not only to play but also to discover. You can only carry 1 item at a time, so keep that in mind. Zorro, despite very basic presentation, is one of my most favorite C64 games, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one feeling this way. So, if by any odd chance you've never heard of it, it's definitely worth your time. Piracy is a game I found by coincidence. After spending a summer at my grandma's and playing Sid Meier's Pirates there on my cousin's C64 with a disk drive, I wanted the same experience on mine. Thing is, I only had a tape deck, so I was looking for a version of Pirates that would run off tape. Needless to say, I never found one. But what I did find was Piracy, a little known gem that, while not fulfilling that pirate's itch, definitely proved to be hella fun both alone against the CPU and in multiplayer. It's basically beautifully stylized in a pirate team board game, kinda similar to checkers but enhanced for replayability. The players move in turn, one after another, and each turn can either consist of moving your marines or launching one from the ship. The goal of the game is to either kill all opposing units or to destroy opposing cannon base by walking over to them. The units can only move forwards and diagonally, but always towards the enemy and can never move backwards. Keeping it all in mind, you have to carefully plan how to release your units as they all move simultaneously in the direction that you send them to. And if there happens to be a broken chain in the way, a unit is removed from the game. So, while the game is very simple and easy to learn, it requires strategic approach to master and is really fun. And with this episode ending, we're closed C64's 1985. It was easily one of the more fruitful and entertaining years for Commodore gamers, and some of the titles that released are considered absolute classics to this day. The next video in the series will be the first episode for 1986. An interesting year, given Commodore itself released its first true 16-bit machine in the form of Amiga 1000. How did it impact C64 gaming? Well, we'll learn in a week or so. So subscribe not to miss it. If you liked the video, you know what to do. If you didn't, let me know in the comments below. If you feel like helping me make the channel better, I'd appreciate Patreon sub or YouTube membership. But if you don't want to or can't do those, likes, subscribes and shares are great too. Most of all, however, I would like to take a second here and thank all of the YouTube Let's Play and playthrough creators from whose videos short bits were taken for this one as a background to my commentary. They're amazing, and thanks to their efforts, retro community can prevail for years longer and in better form than it could have otherwise. So thank you. For me though, this is all, so have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Peace.